As a copywriter or marketer, what has been your experience with collaborative projects? That's a project that has more than one input, more than one stakeholder. For most, it's been horrible. Hey, I'm Justin Hitt with Ad Briefing's Copywriting Tips. I want to share with you some of the problems and challenges that folks have with editing with large teams and some of the scenarios in which you can make this easier. First off, very many consulting projects, copywriting projects are going to have more than one stakeholder involved. You're going to have multiple sources that come together to produce a draft. That draft is going to get a client review. It's going to get internal review. It's going to get approved. You'll produce a final draft, and then you're going to finally publish the materials. You'll release it as a deliverable in the project. Now, I know I'm covering some of the technical details, but this is very important as a copywriter or a marketer or a business development professional to know how to bring those resources together, because what happens very often is with multiple editors and stakeholders, you get an unintentional creep in the project. So the original document was supposed to be a sales letter, and then the sales letter becomes like a giant report or a giant book, because there are so many people who want to put their 2 cents in. Even though they hired a professional like yourself, they still want to get in there and wordsmith it and tweak it out. And that's a real problem. There's also a lot of he said, she said revisions that makes the back and forth quite a frustration to get that draft copy finished. And then there's often things that get taken out, changes that are lost, or inaccurate details that cause the final report, document, white paper, technical paper to just kind of not make any sense, to be out of context. Now, I create a lot of technical documents that have to do with governance and review of regulatory policy. Now, that doesn't sound like a copywriting effort, but we use a lot of copywriting in our kickoff memos. We use a lot of copywriting in how we communicate the importance and need for getting the right materials in the document. But the document itself has a predefined structure, just like any technical report might. And we need to follow that structure. But it's a lock that the more people that get involved, or the more people that know you're producing the report, the more memos and more feedback. Like, for example, many of the findings reports that we do, and you may do findings reports as a consultant, they have a management response, because we're doing this work on behalf of a third party. So the group that's receiving the recommendation is supposed to respond with the actions they're going to take as a result of now being aware of this problem. Well, instead of getting just a management response, we very often get a desire to reword the findings, not reward the findings. They're not happy at all that we found that they have deficiencies or defects or problems. They want us to redescribe that, because the third party that's going to review the report is also the manager of the people who are being found as deficient in some area. Now, you might not be writing technical reports. You might be writing sales letters, marketing pieces, content for websites. Very often, the input from the customer is not as valuable as the derived findings you create as a consultant, subject matter expert, or business development professional. So what can you do to better structure your projects so that they come out with a cleaner, more purpose-driven deliverable? And this is especially necessary if you're on a royalty basis or you get paid for performance. So here's what I add to the process. I just described the process where you have multiple sources coming together to become a draft. That draft then gets revised and becomes a final, and then the final is formatted and cleaned up to be published. Now, a lot of people make the mistakes of worrying about the formatting in the draft stages. What you want to worry about in the draft stages is getting together a timeline of the modifications and changes, as well as the justification for modifications and changes. And you want to add in front of this entire process, and this will make that changelog more clear, a 3-step approach. I'll share this 3-step approach for you, but it often removes the problem of too many cooks in the kitchen, where you have too many people involved and too many people want to take the document in different directions, and you want it to say different things. And then, of course, as time progresses, the original intent is lost. So we have a new first step called the purpose and planning. What is the purpose of this document? If you're doing a document for the customer, this is in your statement of work. This is outlining that they are going to do a sales letter with the intent of offering XYZ product. You're going to do an order form for the XYZ product. This is really the development of your statement of work, which becomes the guideline for every piece of that document that is eventually the deliverable. Before you kick it off, there's a next step. It's called a kickoff memo. It is a distillation of the original statement of work, of the original purpose and intent of the document, to basically provide a checklist of what are we doing here. It outlines who's responsible for what, where certain inputs will come, and the general sets up in advance the general guidelines for the review cycle. So, for example, a kickoff memo may name the requirements of the document in a bullet list, and then it will say, okay, well, marketing is going to provide X, Y, and Z. And it's not a specific statement, but it's kind of like, in summary, we're going to get marketing information from marketing, sales information from sales, product information from the product people. We're going to get, you're outlining the responsible parties. Now, why do you do this? Well, by outlining the responsible parties, you are shortcutting your where to get answers from, but you're also saving yourself time in review, because if somebody in marketing provides product feature details, you're not going to take their word for it. You're going to go back to the product people and you're going to find out whether or not that's accurate, and then you're going to put it in, because product is responsible for product. A lot of times you'll find that the lawsuits associated with false advertising or misleading advertising conditions is a result of just too many cooks in the kitchen. There was no clear definition of the authoritative source of information that was included in the final draft or the final version, and somebody said something that wasn't quite true. And then once the project progresses, your kickoff member is also going to have the time frame in which this project is supposed to be done. But as your project progresses, it can start to drag on. And when it drags on, people start rushing to get that final out the door. I want you to have a very consistent and streamlined timeline that gets this project done and gets this document in a final version pretty much as quickly as possible. And that way you can get it off your plate. Now, the third step you're going to use that is prior to the normal steps that everybody else is using is going to be a research and resources. So you take that roles and responsibility list and you start doing your research. You start developing your sources. You start identifying resources who can work on the editing, your subject matter experts, and you're really going to just start going into detail to fulfill the requirements summarized in the kickoff memo and the requirements in your actual purpose and planning. That way you know specifically what is this document for, what is it supposed to accomplish, what is it supposed to include, and you can start fleshing out that draft with a lot more intelligence. Now, this solves the problem of not having a clear deadline and specific parts of the document. See, a lot of people will say, we want to have this document done by July, yet it's a 5-piece document and they don't have kind of a mapping of the 5 pieces that need to be done in a certain amount of time. If you're writing a sales letter, well, what is the objective criteria in which you'll judge the sales letter? That's going to help in the review cycle. That'll help drive down the amount of time it takes to get something approved by the customer. One of the things about the kickoff meeting, if you're writing a sales copy for a larger organization and you need legal involved, you've given legal a heads up so that they'll be ready when your draft's ready. Because you don't want to get your draft done and then have legal look at it last minute and then they're confused about something. Dan Kennedy tells the story about the legal department for an insurance company just completely upset with a sales letter and then calling out specific points as far as, these claims, you can't make these claims, you can't say this, you can't say that. And Dan Kennedy's response was, well, then you need to tell your sales department, because here's the brochure that says those things and you've printed out 1 million of them. So you really want to be able to trace out your resources. Where did this piece of information come from? If this piece of information is incorrect, who can tell me what is correct? You want to outline all that up front. if we do a review cycle, which managers are going to look at it? There's no, when you come up to review time, well, let me pass it around a little bit and get some feedback. This is not a document by committee. This is a document by design. Now that's where your change log comes in. Your draft document will include a change log, and this is kind of a change management philosophy that's used in Six Sigma. It's used in a lot of corporations, but essentially it is your ability as a commander of the document. And I got more details on how this works in the collaborative editing system, but it basically is a ledger of changes in a document, a ledger of the reviews, and a ledger of the approvals, giving you version numbers for the document. Now, you might be thinking you need to have some kind of fancy software system to do this. I know a lot of folks that have used FrameMaker, InDesign, Microsoft Word, document systems where you got to check in and check out documents. You actually don't need any of that. You can use it, and it is beneficial. But again, by adding these 3 simple steps, defining the purpose and planning out your document in advance, having a kickoff meeting that has a memo, some kind of artifact that says, hey, look, here's what's going to happen. Here's who I'm expecting to be involved. Here's the criteria in which we're going to judge this final piece. Here's the schedule. That's a huge value. If you go in and do your research and resources, which is actually assigning who's creating which part, you got a 5-part document, you assign each part to an individual, and then you can have a reviewer for each part. That will allow that document to be produced in pieces. And then when you put it all back together, then you have clear reviewers for the overall document. Now, I know I'm bringing in expertise that I use to create very complex documents. But if you've listened to the other programs that I've covered in Ad Briefing's Copywriting Tips, and you're not just writing a press release, or you're not just writing a sales letter, and you're writing a whole marketing campaign, then this is a very important methodology and approach to look at. Now, of course, I cover this more in my collaborative editing system, which doesn't require special software. If you have a typewriter and a pencil, you can use the collaborative editing system. But the key to understand is that you'll stray too far from the purpose of the original document if you just allow all these people to provide their feedback. There's a risk that you could upset a customer if they provide valid feedback for their marketing in general, but not this document in specific. There's a challenge where changes get lost and those archival materials can't be reused. I was working with a subscriber who was doing a series of sales letters. So they were doing 3 sales letters. And those 3 sales letters were going to be tested, and his sources were other controls. Now, in the process of writing those 3 sales letters, he knew the intent of the customer was just to pick one letter and use it. So he kind of put a little more effort in one letter versus the other ones. And I explained to him, look, you've got to build out a system so that the 3 sales letters are the natural result of the effort you put into that system. And then you don't sell the customer, the customer wants to pay for one of the 3 sales letters. You don't do that. You say, look, you need a follow-up campaign. What is the structure in which those sales letters will be delivered? Are you going to do any landing pages or name squeezes in order to capture leads to set up the sales letter? One of the mistakes that many clients make is that they'll hire one copywriter for the lead generation and one copywriter for the sales letter rather than collaboration, where they would have the same copywriter write the lead sources and a sales letter, and another copywriter write the lead sources and a sales letter, and then A/B split them so that you can figure out which one's best, because the leads from one copywriter might be better conversion on the other person's sales letter. But again, using this method, you can define all that up front in your purpose and planning, adjust your statement of work, get your deposits or your funding straight, and then kick off. And now you've narrowed the scope of work, because what happened is he got into this thing and he's written 3 complete sales letters and kind of focused on one of the sales letters to get picked versus the others. And the client picks one of the ones that he knows is not his best work. And what happened here is he knows it's not his best work. It's now going to go out in a campaign. It's not likely to get the results that they were looking for, and he's going to get blamed. And it's not because he tried to take a shortcut and make one letter better than the others and kind of just piece the other ones together with formulas and copywriters. It's because the project wasn't clearly defined to deliver one quality sales letter. See, if the project was defined, the customer could get one sales letter that fits the needs and purpose. they could test that one sales letter against the control, and that copywriter and the reviewers and all the people involved have spent less work to get an answer faster. So look at your documents as deliverables, but not as necessarily standoff items alone. Press releases is the same way. Sending one press release doesn't do anything. You might need to take the key news element and write 3 press releases and send them out 2 weeks apart in order to get any action on a press release. Now, if you're working with big corporations, they'll create stuff just to create it. But ultimately, if you want results for your clients, you're going to use an editing system that puts in place the steps necessary to know what document's going to be created. What's the purpose of that document? How will it be used in the environment? It's going to kick that thing off with the key criteria for evaluation, the requirements of that document. Everybody's going to agree on a schedule, and then you're going to get to work. Then you're going to have the resources come together to create your sources rather than you having to dig through a lot of materials, when a lot of these key elements that you'll need to create most documents are off the top of mind. At least they can help you narrow down where to dig in the source material. And then finally, you'll create a draft that gets reviewed. But as you're creating that draft, you're going to use some kind of changelog so you know what's being changed, who's changing it, where did the information come from. That draft gets approved, then you turn it into a final. You don't have 30 approvals. You don't have a committee of approvals. You have 1 or 2 people involved who are going to review it, and they're authorized to review it, and everybody's agreed on the review, and then you have a final document. You're not going to worry about grammar, cosmetics, or anything until you're into the final document, and you're not even going to worry about format until you're into the publish, because if you're writing the documents in Microsoft Word or even text document editors, and then you're going to load it into InDesign for the format and layout, then why worry about format and layout in the original document? You can just focus on key emphasis and basic markup. Now, of course, this is not a complete system for having multiple editors on your team. It's not a complete system for having multiple customers or stakeholders, or even cataloging and librarying materials to reuse them later, but it should get you started to avoid many of the common mistakes that I've described here. And you know about the mistakes. No clear deadline for the parts has been the biggest one. Everybody tries to jam in their piece at the end of the, when you're up against the 11th hour. You're going to avoid a lot of the problems that I've described here, like contributors not understanding the original objective of the document. And you go from a sales letter to a sales letter and 3 lead generation pieces, but you are only getting paid for the sales letter. I know I've covered a lot here. I'm Justin Hitt with Ad Briefing's Copywriting Tips. If you visit us at www.adbriefings.co.uk, you can ask questions about collaborative editing. Like I mentioned, I do have a complete system that talks about collaborative editing that I've used in corporate environments. I've used it for freelance projects. I've used it for my own materials. And it creates artifacts, copywriting or document artifacts that you can start using right away. Sometimes you don't have to wait till you have a final document before you can use excerpts from your editorial process in order to start driving leads to a site or driving traffic to a site. One such example of that is while you've got your draft document together, there might be sections of that document that are approved, and those sections can then become teaser. So it's another writing assignment for you, but the document can become a teaser that then leads to a known lead generation source, which sets up sending the letter that you're producing in the future. Now, these things can be distractions. Again, that's why we have the kickoff memo. That's why we have purpose. That's why we have an assignment of duties. But ultimately, with the complete system, you'll be able to knock out 400-page books, sales letters, lead pieces, email series, everything that a customer really needs. And you'll be able to do it with better outcomes, better results, and better purpose. So I hope I'm going to summarize this as kind of a change management or controls so that you can get your deliverables done faster. If you have any questions about this or anything else, again, I'm Justin Hitt with Ad Briefing's Copywriting Tips, and you can visit us at www.adbriefings.co.uk. We're here to help copywriters, marketers, and business development professionals improve their business, create better results for their clients, and profit in any economy.